Hello, I am PJ and I am founder of Rephrase, an organisation that provides healthy relationships and sex education without the awkwardness. So we basically work with organisations such as schools, parents, teachers, youth groups, the YMCA, the probation service, police and domestic abuse survivors. So it's very, very varied. But today we are going to be talking about relationships. Caring connection or crippling control. Now, a little bit of a trigger warning, so there will be some hard-hitting topics spoken about. And if you hear anything today that you find upsetting in any way, I ask you please to reach out to a member of staff, okay? So, human beings, we are wired to be in relationships, whatever that looks like. It'll be different for all of us. But we crave community. We crave to find our tribe. Now, it's really good to be in a healthy relationship for our mental and emotional well-being. The challenge is that we can't always identify when a relationship moves from being healthy to unhealthy and possibly even abusive, because abusive relationships do not start out as abusive. They start out as a really intense, exciting experience. So it's not about how a relationship starts that matters, it's about how it evolves. So in order to identify the red flag behaviours, we need to just look briefly at what is involved in a healthy relationship. So we're going to look at some of those qualities and then how those can subtly change to morph into potentially unhealthy or abusive relationships. Now, before we really start, I want to just talk about self-esteem briefly, okay? Self-esteem is about how we feel about ourselves, okay? And the reason I mention this is so significant when it comes to sex and relationships because it impacts our decision-making. Okay? Can you tell me how much is that worth? £10. Okay. How much is it worth now? £10. Okay. How much is it worth now? You sure? Okay. How much is it worth now? £10, you're right. I could go to the shop now and up to the value of £10, I could spend this, okay? This is exactly like us. So it does not matter what someone does to us or says to us, our worth and our value never change. Now, what I want you to take away from today, if it's only one thing, you, every single one of you, deserves and has the right to experience healthy relationships. So what does a healthy relationship look like? Well, there are loads of qualities, but I'm going to talk about the 3 C's today. That's communication, consent, and connection, okay? So communication is one of the most important things when it comes to healthy relationships. Can you put your hands up if you see a pregnant person with a pram? Okay, hands down. Can you put your hands up if you can see someone twerking at a barbecue? The biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Now, miscommunication happens, that's a fact, okay? When it comes to communication, 7% is our words, 38% is the tone of voice, and 55% is our body language. So that means when we communicate in our relationships, we need to make sure that our words marry our actions, okay? Now, they are some probably familiar qualities of healthy relationships that you'll come across. But what I want you to do now, put your hands together like that, and I'd like you to imagine that you have got the most amazing slice of pizza in your hands, okay? Think of your favourite toppings. Sometimes people mention pineapple, which is quite controversial, but we'll move on. So you've got your pizza in your hands, all right? What are you left with if I take away that dough base? A gloopy mess. Not going to be great. And this is very much like our relationships. So think of the toppings like the activities and interests, okay? And the base, the attitudes, the values, and the behaviour. Without a firm foundation of good, healthy qualities, relationships are not likely to survive or be sustainable. Now, when it comes to consent, I like to talk about consent in the context of emotionally safe sex because at the end of the day, this is about you being emotionally and physically safe when it comes to your own experiences of sex and relationships. It is fundamentally about permission giving and receiving, okay? The UK law is it's 16 for all sexual activity. But that doesn't mean you've given consent just because you are 16. And the 3 components that need to be present, the mental capacity to either engage or refrain from an activity, the physical capacity to either engage or refrain in an activity, and free of fear, coercion, and blackmail. Let's have a look at consent in action.
Hi, I'm here and I'm trying to figure out what consent really is and how to get it right. Hey, can I borrow your phone?
No.
Foiled. Hey, can I have your phone?
No.
Damn! Hey, give me your phone. Victory. Was that consent?
No, that was coercion. Consent must be voluntary.
Jonathan?
Yeah?
Hey, can I borrow your phone really fast?
No.
Okay, great. How about now?
No, clearly he was incapacitated and could not give consent.
Hey, can I borrow your phone? You didn't say no. Did I get it right?
No, two negatives do not make a positive. The absence of no does not mean yes.
Hey, can I borrow your guys' phones?
Yeah, sure. Why? What do you want it for?
It's okay, don't worry about it. I'm sure it's fine, just give it to her.
Tell me I'm good.
Group phones make things complicated. Looks like the middle person was intimidated. Sorry, no go.
Look, can I just have your phone?
Yeah. Just no text or international calls.
Are you comfortable with me changing your ringtone?
As long as it's not disco.
Can I play with your game center?
No, my games are sacred to me, but you can update my software.
Shazam?
Shazam.
Oh. Tell me, please.
A conscious, voluntary decision without coercion or intimidation with clearly spoken boundaries. Congratulations.
Yes.
So when it comes to consent, this is a really good mnemonic that captures the key elements, okay? So when you think consent, think fries, okay? Consent needs to be freely given, no coercion at all, okay? No pressure. It is reversible. Consent can be withdrawn at any point in time, okay? It's informed, which means the people involved know exactly what's going on and the potential consequences. It's enthusiastic, so this is verbal and non-verbal, okay? And it is specific. So if two people hooked up last weekend and they meet up again next weekend, does not mean consent has automatically been given. So when it comes to consent, pestering and pressurizing is not seduction, okay? It is coercion, and coercive behavior became a criminal offense in 2015. Aggressive sex is not the same as passionate sex, although pornography would have us believe otherwise. And consent is an enthusiastic yes, okay? It's not a maybe or a silence or a nervous giggle, okay? It's not leaning away. And consensual sexual activity means feeling safe and happy at all times, because in a healthy relationship, nobody will pressurize you to do something that you don't want to do, even if you've done it before. So connection. Now, we don't hear a lot about connection, but this is really key when it comes down to healthy relationships, okay? Have you seen the film Avatar? Put your hand up if you have. Yeah, so you'll be familiar. In there is a beautiful phrase they use, I see you. I see you. It means I get you, I see into you. And when you break down intimacy into me see, this is what this is all about. So when you're in a relationship, check and see if you feel seen. Feeling heard. We need to listen to understand, not necessarily to respond. We've got two ears and one mouth for a reason. Feeling understood. You don't have to agree all the time. We're all different. We're not going to always agree. But we need to understand and recognize that someone is feeling that way in that moment and vice versa. And feeling valued. Remember that £10 note at the very beginning, okay? It doesn't matter what someone says to you or does to you. Your worth and your value never change. It is a really fine line between when a relationship moves from healthy to unhealthy or abusive. And these are some of the more familiar abusive behaviours that you may well have just been aware of, okay? What I want to flag to you today are the ones in yellow. Comes right back down to power and control still, but these are so subtle that they could be described as the hidden abuse. So love bombing. This comes from, it's a form of emotional manipulation technique. It comes from a place of insecurity. And it's when someone tries to keep you in a relationship. So it could be excessive texts, presents, dates, verbal affirmation, but it's really extreme and intense. Then we've got gaslighting. So gaslighting is when someone hurts you and blames you for it. Now, a victim of gaslighting, whether it be over days, weeks, months, or years, ultimately will end up doubting their own sense of self, their own sense of reality. I was doing a workshop in a school, and we did this whole thing about red flag behaviours, and at the end, there was an option to do some anonymous feedback. And this was year 10, so 14, 15-year-olds, and one of the bits I got back said, I will no longer let him treat me in an unhealthy way. And in that moment, I got goosebumps, because I realised that that person had not only identified what was going on, they'd named it, and they were going to call it out. Which means, hopefully, in 10 years' time, I'm not going to see them in a domestic abuse group. This is so important to know and recognise and be able to call it out if you see it happening. Isolation, easily missed, because when you start your relationship, it is so intense and exciting. You just want to be together all the time. The challenge is, a healthy relationship is basically two worlds joining together. If one of you leaves your world behind, that's a warning sign that something's not right. Because if you stop seeing your friends as much, or you stop hanging out with your family as much, or you drop the hobbies you used to do, those are all little signs, warning signs, that there is an imbalance in that relationship. Volatility. Now, we see this in films. The humongous arguments and the amazing make-up sex. Now, we are not perfect human beings, and there is no such thing as a perfect relationship. So it's very common to have relationships that are a little bit bumpy, and that's okay. If you find yourself, though, having extremes of highs and lows, that is another red flag. And extreme jealousy and possessiveness. Now, jealousy is a very natural emotion that we will all experience at times, okay? But when jealousy moves into the realm of possessiveness, then we've got a problem. It's about control. It comes back to that power and control imbalance. So the abuse cycle starts with charm and it ends with harm, but it goes back to charm. And so that cycle keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. So recognizing abusive behaviors is not the death of romance. It's about recognizing that abuse was never romantic in the first place. So our responsibility, you see the dark circle in the middle, this is what we are responsible for. Just our actions, our words, our behavior, and the consequences. We are not responsible for other people's behavior. So what is the reality? Well, 1 in 4 15 to 19-year-olds have already experienced intimate partner abuse. That could be a previous relationship or it could be a current one, but that's 25%, okay? And the most common forms are controlling behavior, threatening behavior, and sexual coercion. I was working with a group of 16-year-old lads in London, and one of them was in a really toxic relationship at the time, and he was actually experiencing symptoms of PTSD. So his anxiety was high, depression. He'd stopped sleeping, he stopped eating. That relationship was literally destroying him. So what I want you to know, if your physical, mental, or emotional health is at risk, love yourself enough to walk away. And it can be hard, and we can make excuses for the people we're with, but it's really important to give yourself that permission, because it's more important to be alone for the right reasons than with somebody for the wrong reasons. Healthy relationships will build you up. Words will build you up. Okay? If they break you down, then there is something wrong with that relationship. And if something doesn't feel right, please trust your gut instinct. You know that feeling? You can't even describe it, but you just know something's not right. It is there to keep you safe, okay? The only people who benefit from you not having boundaries or want you to have boundaries are those who will basically benefit from you not having any. Love is it's an action, not just a feeling, not just an emotion, okay? It's got to match up. The words, the actions need to correlate together. And if someone does show you their true colours, don't try and repaint them, okay? You deserve and have the right to experience healthy relationships. Thank you for listening.
PJ Liver, everybody. Hello, come in here. Thank you so much. Loads there, I'm sure, to talk about. Just take a 30-second buzz again. What do you want to ask, PJ? We have got 5 minutes. We're running, if you're joining us online, just to be clear, we're running the whole program this afternoon 10 minutes late because we've got a gap in the program later on. So we will finish on time, but we're 10 minutes behind, so to speak. So have a quick buzz, have a quick conversation, and then we'll put some questions to PJ. Have we got a question in the room? Anybody with the microphone?
Is that working? Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
cool. So those behaviours, the abusive behaviours that you showed, the ones in yellow, a lot of them are also signs of mental illnesses from your abusive partner. How can you, if you have a partner that's mentally ill, how can you try and help them without putting yourself at risk?
It's a very good question, and it's complex, as you can imagine. So I think the best thing to do is, first of all, recognise what's going on. Because, as I said, that it's very easy to make excuses for someone we care about and love. I was working with a young man who was in a relationship, and she had mental ill health that needed external support. And he desperately tried to fix her because he adored her and loved her. And he began to break in the process. So it's definitely about realising what's actually going on. And then you can begin to unpick about perhaps what's causing it. But it's about self-preservation as well, because actually, a bit like someone said earlier about the air mask in a plane, if you don't look after yourself first, you can't help anyone else anyway.
Thank you. It's really good.
So an online one. Do you think the age of consent should be higher?
Interesting one. Okay. So the age of consent, you probably realise the law doesn't always marry up with where society is anyway, in terms of the diversity, but the consensual age is 16, and the kind of background to that is because at 16, the belief is someone is mature enough, emotionally enough to actually be able to make decisions for their sexual well-being. Okay, you're going to get very different views, I guess, ultimately, in terms of what people think about sex. When I do workshops and things with students, I always talk about, obviously, the safety element, but also saying to them, you're allowed to delay sex. It's a valid choice as well, because we're living in a very sexualized society. So actually, you've got all these different options, rather than children growing up from a very young age, often watching pornography now as well, and thinking that by 16, you need to have had sex. So it's about saying, actually, this is, if this is happening, this is how to be safe, but also you can choose. You can choose to delay it.
Thank you. Got another one in, yeah.
Hi, I was just wondering how you think social media and pornography affects relationships, especially domestic relationships.
Great question. Oh, this is a whole nother session. So, without a doubt, pornography, I've worked with couples of all ages, and relationships have been destroyed because of pornography. The bottom line is, it is a very distorted version of sex and reality of relationships, and people are going in for specific surgeries to change their bodies to look like the bodies they see in porn. There's a lot of, there's no real reference to communication, consent, contraception, leg cramps, not fancying it, not feeling up for it, that kind of thing. It's so distorted, and so we've got people growing up thinking, that's how I have to perform, that's what I need to accept to be a good lover and not be cancelled. So again, it's about changing that narrative and say, look, that's what's there, but they're paid actors to perform. That's not reality. So let's have a look at what might actually be the reality, and talking about the relationship side and the whole consent side. But very impactful on relationships, definitely.
Another one from online. How can you support someone you're dating if they've been in an abusive relationship before?
Yeah, great question. So it comes back to communication. I think if you are in a position to have the honest conversation, because that person obviously needs to be incredibly vulnerable. And, when we come down to sex and relationships, we are all completely vulnerable. You're at your most vulnerable. So ultimately, you want to be with someone who you can trust, have that intimacy with, the levels of trust, and be able to talk about your boundaries, your needs, your likes, dislikes. So absolute bottom line comes back down to communication, and kind of taking it from there, really.
Thank you.
Got time for one more in the audience. Just got a microphone. Yeah.
After walking away from a relationship like that, what advice would you give to someone dealing with the backlash of it?
So in terms of the person who's left?
Yeah, leaving the...
Yeah, so make sure you've got a support group around you, whether that's friends, family members. Talk about what's been going on, because I think a lot of the time we suppress things as well in order to survive. So it's very much about kind of recognising what's been going on, naming it, kind of calling it out, and just making sure you are with people who genuinely have your back. And can help you, because our self-esteem, when things like that happen, it just hits rock bottom. And then I find with toxic relationships, people go back to toxic relationships again and again because they're comfortable, because they're familiar. So it doesn't mean they're right, but because they're familiar, it feels safe, and then you get sort of trapped in that. So surrounding yourself with people who can kind of be strong enough for you when you need being lifted up, basically.
PJ, live it, everybody. Round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.